Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that could really change how we all use the internet. It's the Google antitrust case.
Yeah, this is a big one.
It's a really big one. You know, it's not every day that the Justice Department goes after a company worth like trillions of dollars.
It's true. And, it really does remind me of that Microsoft case from a while back.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's going to be really interesting to see if this ends up kind of reshaping the tech world in the same way.
So the DOJ is basically saying that Google just has way too much power, especially when it comes to search and online advertising. They're even talking about, like, potentially breaking Google up.
Wow.
Imagine a world where Google doesn't own Chrome or Android anymore.
Yeah, that's pretty wild when you think about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, think what that could mean for, like, the average person.
Yeah.
More competition usually means better prices. So you could be looking at cheaper ads, which we all know eventually affects all of us one way or another. And then who knows what kind of new innovation we might see if, like, smaller companies actually had more of a chance. We might even see some really cool new alternatives to Google popping up.
Yeah, that makes sense. But honestly, I've tried switching away from Google before, and it's so rough.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I get so used to their whole ecosystem that everything else just feels so clunky.
Right.
So, like, what kind of specific changes could realistically happen if the DOJ actually gets what it wants?
Well, one possibility is that the court could force Google to kind of loosen its grip on those agreements that it has with companies like Apple.
Okay.
So right now, Apple pays a ton of money to make Google the default search engine on its devices. But what if instead of that, you were actually asked which search engine you wanted when you set up your new phone?
Oh, interesting.
That could be a total game changer.
That would be pretty interesting, for sure. And, it just makes me think of something else, too. We haven't even talked about the whole data aspect of all of this. Like, Google collects so much data on every single one of us. Does this case have any implications for that?
Oh, it absolutely does. This whole case could actually lead to users having more control over their data. If Google starts facing more competition, they might actually have to offer stronger privacy protections to get people to stay with them.
Wow. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
It seems like this case kind of touches so many different aspects of the tech industry and just our digital lives in general. So breaking up Google is definitely on the table. What other options are out there?
Well, another potential outcome is that Google might be forced to actually give other companies access to its data. Imagine a world where, like, other search engines had the same level of data as Google does.
Yeah, that would be a major shakeup for sure. But I'm kind of curious, what is Google's side of the story in all of this? They can't just be sitting back and taking this right.
Oh, of course not. They are fighting back hard. Their main argument is that they are not a monopoly. They're saying that people choose Google simply because they are the best.
Right.
They're saying they have the most innovative products and they have the highest quality search results.
So it's like they're saying, we're just that good, and the DOJ is kind of being unfair.
Yeah, exactly. Google also argues that breaking them up could actually hurt innovation. They say that their current structure lets them invest in, like, groundbreaking technology, like especially in artificial intelligence.
Speaking of AI, I remember reading that the DOJ initially wanted Google to sell off all of its AI investments, but then they dropped that demand. What happened there?
Yeah, it seemed like a big shift, right? Well, it looks like the DOJ is now more interested in regulating Google's AI ambitions than shutting them down completely. So instead of forcing Google to sell off its AI ventures, now they want to be notified about any future AI investments Google makes.
So they're basically trying to keep a closer eye on things rather than hitting the brakes altogether.
Right. It seems like they're trying to find, like, that sweet spot, that balance between fostering AI innovation and preventing Google from just completely dominating this new and, potentially transformative field.
Yeah, this whole AI aspect definitely adds like a whole other layer of complexity to this case.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're dealing with not just one massive lawsuit, but two different stories playing out at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely adds another dimension to things for sure. And speaking of adding layers, there's also, like, the whole political side of this case.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting how this whole crackdown on big tech started under one administration and then just kind of continued with the next one. Makes you wonder about all the lobbying that's going on behind the scenes.
Oh, I bet it's intense. It's like this whole case is like a high-stakes poker game
Yeah.
with the future of the internet at stake.
Yeah, for sure.
But, when I think about Google's argument, I can kind of see their point. They built this company from the ground up, and now they're being told that they're too successful. It just seems a little weird,
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I mean, it does kind of raise this interesting question about how we define success in tech and when that success turns into something harmful, it's not always super clear-cut.
And to be fair, haven't there been times when, like, breaking up a big company actually led to worse outcomes for consumers?
Yeah.
I vaguely remember, like, learning about some antitrust cases in history class where that kind of happened.
Yeah, you're right to bring that up. I mean, it's not like breaking up a company is like a guaranteed win-win solution.
Right.
There are definitely some examples where it backfired and then you ended up with higher prices and less innovation and just like a messy market that wasn't really helping anyone.
So it's not as simple as just saying break them up and everything will be better. This is obviously a really complicated situation with like a ton of factors to consider.
Right.
But, this whole thing reminds me of that Microsoft case we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Didn't they face like similar accusations about using their power to just crush the competition?
Yeah, there are definitely some parallels there.
Okay.
Back then, Microsoft was accused of like bundling its Internet Explorer browser with its Windows operating system so that it could like squeeze out competitors like Netscape Navigator.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of similar to what Google's being accused of now, right? Using their dominance in search to give their other products an unfair advantage.
Right. So they were basically using one product to dominate a bunch of other markets.
Exactly.
But, the tech world has changed so much since then. Is it really fair to compare those two situations?
That's a really good point. I mean, the internet is a completely different beast now than it was back then. We rely on it for like everything.
Right.
And the power of those network effects is even stronger now. That whole idea that the more people use a product, the more valuable it becomes.
Yeah.
And Google's whole business model with data and targeted ads is just way more complex than anything Microsoft was doing back then.
It's true. Like Google is basically like woven into the fabric of our digital lives at this point. It's hard to even imagine the internet without them. But I guess that's what makes this whole case so important, right? The potential consequences of Google maintaining this level of power are just huge.
Exactly. It's not just about search results or ad revenue anymore. This case is about who controls access to information, how our online experiences are shaped, and ultimately what kind of digital future we end up with.
And speaking of the future, what about Google's moves in the AI space? They seem pretty determined to be a major player there. Is that part of their strategy to stay ahead of the game, even if they're facing these restrictions in other areas?
It's definitely a possibility AI is like the next big thing in tech, and Google wants to make sure they're leading the pack. It's pretty interesting how they've framed their AI development as being essential for innovation, almost like they're using it as a shield against these antitrust accusations.
So it's like they're saying if you break us up, you're going to be holding back progress in AI. Pretty clever tactic, I'll give them that.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder if their dominance in AI could lead to like a whole new set of antitrust concerns down the road.
Right. That's the big question, isn't it? It's like we're trying to predict the future of the internet while we're still trying to figure out how to deal with the present.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not just the government that's looking at Google here. Public opinion plays a huge role in all of this, too.
That's so true. There's definitely been this growing sense of unease about the power of big tech in general. Like, people are starting to realize how much influence these companies have on our lives, and it's making a lot of people uncomfortable.
Absolutely. We're seeing more and more concern about data collection, how our data is being used and potentially misused. This Google case is really bringing all those anxieties to the surface and forcing us to have a public conversation about what kind of relationship we want to have with these tech giants.
It's a conversation that's long overdue, for sure.
For sure.
And, this whole Google case isn't happening in isolation. There are other antitrust investigations and lawsuits going on around big tech right now, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Justice Department is also looking into Google's dominance in advertising technology, and there are separate cases against Apple, Meta, and Amazon, all accusing them of anti-competitive practices.
Wow.
It's pretty clear that regulators are getting a lot more aggressive with big tech as a whole.
It feels like we're watching this, major power shift happening right now with the government trying to, regain some control over this digital world that's been basically shaped by these tech companies.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
And the outcome of these cases is going to have such a ripple effect across the entire industry. It's exciting in a kind of scary way.
It really is. It's like watching one of those slow motion earthquakes,
Yeah.
Something big is happening, but we have no idea what it's going to look like when it's all over.
It makes you wonder what a world with a less powerful Google would even look like. Would we see all these new search engines popping up? Would we have more control over our data? Or would we just end up with this super fragmented internet that's a nightmare to use?
It's fascinating to think about all the different possibilities, right? And even if Google is found guilty of violating antitrust laws, that's not the end of the story. The next chapter is all about the remedies, the actions that the court might take to address the harm that's been done.
Oh, right. We've been so focused on the guilty or not guilty part that we haven't even talked about what happens next. So what are some of the possible remedies that are being considered?
Well, one option is a financial penalty, basically, just a massive fine that's designed to punish Google and prevent them from doing this kind of thing again.
A fine just seems like kind of a slap on the wrist for a company as rich as Google, though. Don't you think?
Yeah, that's a pretty common criticism. Some people say that for these huge companies, it's just the cost of doing business and it doesn't really change their behavior in the long run.
So what else could happen? Are there options that go beyond just like hitting them in the wallet?
Yeah, there are definitely some more structural remedies that they could consider. The court could force Google to spin off some of its businesses. Like, they could separate search from advertising or turn Android into a completely independent company.
Wow, that would be a huge deal.
Right.
But wouldn't that be incredibly disruptive? I mean, Google is so integrated into everything we do.
It would definitely be a huge undertaking, and it would come with some risks. Some experts argue that such drastic measures could actually end up hurting consumers by making the internet less user-friendly.
So it's like a balancing act. They have to weigh the benefits of breaking up Google against the potential downsides of making such a big change.
Exactly. And then there's another option that's often discussed, changing Google's algorithms.
What do you mean by that?
Well, remember how we talked about Google being accused of favoring its own products in search results? The court could order them to tweak their algorithms to give other companies a fairer chance.
Ah, I see. So like leveling the playing field in terms of how those search results are displayed. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how would they even enforce something like that? Algorithms are so complex.
It would definitely be a challenge. It would require a really deep understanding of how Google's algorithms work and a lot of ongoing monitoring to make sure they're actually following the rules.
This is all so interesting. But it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of the whole remedies thing.
Oh, we definitely have.
Okay,
There are so many possibilities and nuances to consider, and it's important to remember that any remedy that's chosen is probably going to be a combination of different approaches. It's going to be a custom-tailored solution to address the specific violations that are found by the court.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all solution. It has to be designed to fix the specific problems in this case.
Exactly. It's like a legal puzzle, trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together to create a solution that's fair, effective, and addresses everyone's concerns.
It just reminds you how complex this whole case is and how far-reaching the implications are. It's not just about Google's profits. It's about the future of the internet as a whole.
Yeah, it really is mind-boggling to think about how much this one case could change everything. It's like the butterfly effect, but for the internet.
And you know, it's not just the US either. The European Union has already been cracking down on Google for a while, and other countries are watching this whole thing really closely. We could see a wave of new regulations for tech companies all over the world.
Yeah, it's like the internet is this huge global thing, but it's still controlled by individual countries and their laws. It's like a patchwork quilt of rules, I guess.
But let's get back to this specific case for a second. So the trial to figure out the remedies is coming up in April, right? What happens after that?
Well, even if Google is found guilty, they're almost definitely going to appeal the decision. This thing could drag on for years and years.
Oh, wow. So it could be a really long time before we have a resolution. It's a lot of uncertainty for Google and really the whole tech world to deal with.
Definitely. And while all of this is going on, technology is going to keep changing. Who knows what the internet will even look like by the time this is all settled? It's really hard to regulate something that's constantly evolving.
It's like trying to hit a moving target. Okay, so let's say the court does find Google guilty and they've gone through all their appeals. What are some of the arguments for and against the different remedies we've been talking about?
So for people who want to see a financial penalty, the main argument is that it's a quick and easy way to punish Google for doing something wrong. It sends a message without getting too bogged down in the details of like restructuring the company or trying to control their algorithm.
It's like a speed bump to make them slow down and think twice.
Yeah.
But I can also see why some people think that's not enough, especially for a company that's as rich as Google.
Right. Critics say that a fine, even a really big one, is basically just a drop in the bucket for a company like Google, and it doesn't actually fix the problems that allowed them to become so powerful in the first place.
Okay, so what about those other options, like breaking up Google? What are the pros and cons there?
The main argument for breaking up Google is that it would create more competition, which is supposed to lead to more innovation and more choices for consumers. The idea is that smaller, more agile companies could finally compete with Google in different areas.
So it's like breaking up a huge ship so that smaller boats have a chance. Well, I could see the appeal of that. But wouldn't it be really disruptive? I mean, Google is like connected to so many things.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. People who are against breaking up Google say that it could actually make things worse for consumers. It could create a more fragmented internet where everything is controlled by different companies, and that could make things harder to use and maybe even slow down innovation.
It's a tough decision for sure. And what about that idea of making Google change its algorithms? What are the arguments for and against that?
People who like this approach think it's the most direct way to deal with those concerns about Google favoring their own products. If you make the algorithms more fair, then other companies would finally have a real chance to compete.
Right. It's like making sure the referee in a game is actually being fair. But how do you even start to regulate something as complicated as an algorithm?
It would be incredibly difficult. Critics say that algorithmic regulation is a slippery slope that could give the government too much power and lead to censorship. And algorithms are always changing, so any rules you create could be outdated almost immediately.
So it seems like every option has its own unique set of challenges and potential downsides.
Yeah, pretty much. That's
Yeah.
what happens when you try to regulate something as complicated as the internet. There aren't any easy solutions, and every decision you make comes with risks and uncertainties.
Well, one thing's for sure, this Google case has really started a huge conversation about big tech competition and the future of the internet. This is something we'll be talking about for years to come.
Absolutely. And it's important to stay informed and to think critically about the role of technology in our lives. As this case plays out, we need to remember that we, as users and citizens, have a say in shaping the digital world we want to live in.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a really fascinating look at this case and all the issues it raises.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep thinking critically about the role of technology in our lives.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.